In today's workforce, there could be upwards to 4 generations working together, which requires leaders to have a completely different mindset when they're dealing with the different generations. Well, our guest today is Gianna Driver, the Chief HR Officer of Exabeam, and she will bring her unique perspective on how to lead across generations.
Welcome to the Leadership Puzzle. I'm your host, Jeff Lupinacci, co-founder of Evolve HR Solutions. In this project, we're taking a journey to uncover the mysteries of leadership with some of the world's most accomplished leaders. In each episode, we discover the distinct insight from each of these great leaders, enabling us to refine our leadership skills and become more effective leaders. Piece by piece, together, we will assemble the leadership puzzle.
Gianna, thank you so much for joining me today. It is great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right. I've enjoyed our conversations, and I'm a huge superhero fan. I think it's because of the origin story and spending so many years in human resources. That origin story is so fun to hear, and you have a fantastic HR origin story. Because you didn't start in HR. Can you share a little bit of your journey?
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I don't think that there are many people who are in HR today who grew up wanting to be an HR professional. And in some ways, it's kind of sad, right? Because I think it's a really incredible field and space to be in. And for me, I was no different. I grew up early days wanting to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. So very different. My mother worked in a hospital growing up. And so seeing doctors and nurses and people in the medical profession was always part of the definition of what I thought success would be. And I actually started my career in commercial insurance, doing a management rotation program, and quickly started to realize while this fulfills a need in the world, it didn't feel like it was my higher calling. I felt unfulfilled, and I felt like there's got to be more. I didn't work this hard for this long to help large companies reduce their risk exposure and thus reduce their insurance premiums. Nothing wrong with that field whatsoever. It just wasn't really what spoke to my heart. And so then I started working at a very small startup company as person number 3. And what's interesting is when you start at an organization that small and when the world is your oyster and you've got this blank slate sort of mindset, you're open to everything. And over the years, as we grew from 3 people to 20 people and 50 people and 100 people and 200 and 300, et cetera, I naturally gravitated toward all things that I now know are housed in this human resources, people operations space. Right. So whether it was hiring, whether it was performance management, incentive programs, mentorship programs, all of those types of things were naturally what felt right to me. So in some ways, I feel like that was when I started to understand, HR is my jam.
So was there just an epiphany moment that you went, oh, this is HR. I could do this for the rest of my career?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't know that there was a moment in time where I realized, yes, HR is for me, because when I started to understand HR, right, like as it exists for most people in the world, I had a bit of a negative connotation toward HR. I felt like it was just a group of rather boring people who were administratively focused, kind of on the back end, in the shadows, and just one of those like really dull parts of an organization. And that was kind of my, mentality toward HR. So I didn't want to be associated with that because that's for dull, boring people. And I didn't have a dull, boring identity, and I still don't today.
Yeah. Well, I think you probably don't remember the Dilbert commercials, the evil HR director. They, those cartoons really did paint HR as this dull, boring, almost evil place.
Yes, totally. And I'm grateful to have cut my teeth in Silicon Valley working at some really incredible tech companies that, 2 decades ago, we were really defining and redefining the workplace and the employee experience. And so I think had it not been for being out here in the Bay Area, working at some really awesome, cool, progressive tech companies, I don't know, frankly, that I would have been in the HR space. But because, the confluence of both my natural gravitation and interest, as well as the changing landscape and industry within HR, all came together in this beautiful way. Yeah. And frankly, I can't imagine working in any other part of an organization. I truly enjoy this field.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fortunate, because I think in the early 2000s, 20 years ago, the tech world was the space that really pushed HR as
absolutely.
As a discipline. And now, of course, everyone's catching up, which is great. Speaking of the tech world, when we spoke last, we got on the topic of generations in the workforce, Gen Z, millennials, X, Y. I suppose some industries still do have some boomers in there, and how it's so important that leaders today interact, especially the X, Y leaders, interact with the millennials and Zs in a different way. Mm-hmm. You have a unique way of really encapsulating how leaders should be interacting with the next generation. Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, I think it starts by being open and having a really, truly open, inquisitive, curious mindset. And so often I see leaders in organizations who are typically, more tenured professionals have a bit of a closed mindset when it comes to the younger folks in the workplace. And there's this mentality sometimes that Gen Zers, millennials, but really Gen Zers are entitled, that, they come in and don't want to listen. They think they know everything, all of those sorts of, phrases I've heard. And I think it's just a misunderstanding, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think approaching it from a place of curiosity and listening. So one of the things that I love doing is listening to Gen Zers and understanding what makes them tick. And what I've discovered is Gen Zers are a very values-driven, mission-oriented group of folks who are willing to make employment decisions based upon the values of an organization. So they think through the lens of, what is this organization doing for the environment, for humanity? How is it going to enrich me? The Gen Z population has grown up in a very interconnected world with social media. And so they are very attuned to global events, and they're very sensitive to, is this organization walking the walk, or are they just doing this lip service? And I think as leaders in an organization, I think that it's in our best interest for not just Gen Zers, but for the entire workforce to listen, to lean in, and to take the best parts of the Gen Z mindset and say, how can I sprinkle that throughout our ways of working in the organization?
Well, and certainly Gen Zs, as opposed to X and Y, are true digital natives. I think the millennials were the kind of that first wave, but I think Gen Zs at 6 or 7 already had a smartphone.
Yes.
And so that's just changed the way that they think, not good or bad. It's just things differently. So how do you think the X and Y leaders have missed that mark in dealing effectively with specifically Gen Z? I think millennials are slightly different.
Yeah, I think there's been the approach of what's worked for decades and for generations previously, we're just going to rinse and repeat and apply that to the Gen Z, workplace. And that's just not working. And in many ways, I think the pandemic highlighted that, because we were forced to work remotely. I mean, the entire world shut down. And Gen Zers were able to leverage technology to, continue to be productive and to work. And frankly, I think it was some of the older populations and generations that really struggled because, if you're not as proficient with technology, if you're not flexible and used to working at all hours of the day and integrating life with work, then I think it was really challenging. And I think Gen Zers don't necessarily think twice about integrating the work and social and community and professional lives all kind of together. Sometimes boundary setting for all of us can be challenging. But I think in previous generations, the world was very binary. It's, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to put my work face on and I'm going to be professional for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, whatever. Then I'm going to drive home and then I'm going to be, who I actually am. Well, that's not how Gen Z thinks of the world. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that.
They are much more authentic across the whole spectrum of their life. Whereas you're right, a boomer or an X, even Y, they segment their life.
Yeah, totally. What I think is also interesting is I have an 11-year-old daughter. And I was thinking to myself, is she Gen Z or, what is she? Yeah, I was going to say, so the newest generation is the Alpha generation. I guess we ran out of letters in the alphabet, so we had to start over. Now we're at Alpha. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what her generation is like, as they enter the workforce, 10, 15, 20 years from now, because I see the effects of social media, of, having very formative years during a pandemic when we were, masked and socially isolated and stuff. So I think it's going to be a very interesting case study to see how that plays out.
Well, yeah, remote learning for all students over that, couple year period really has made some impacts. And the younger the child was, I think almost the bigger the impact was. They're just further behind what they should be.
Yeah.
You're right.
And I remember she was in second grade during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone trying to learn over Zoom for multiple hours a day is hard, let alone for, a 6, 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And then I remember when we were out in public, right, everyone was masking. It was mandatory. And when we started to open up and become a world where masking wasn't required anymore, learning how to read facial expressions. And, that was something just new and different. She was used to just seeing, this much of a person through a mask. And it's been fascinating to observe and see and to think about how this is going to affect the rest of her life and her working years.
Yeah. Yeah. Wall Street Journal just came out with a survey results literally this morning. So I'm going to throw it out and you may or may not have had a chance to see it, but basically it said the employees who have been 100% remote are not getting that. They're behind the promotions of their peers who have been hybrid or even, full-time during these last couple of years. And which, we've been in HR for a long time. We could have predicted that could be a unwanted outcome of someone being fully remote when there's folks coming into the office.
Yeah.
How do you think that we address that going forward so that the remote employee doesn't just get frustrated with that and jump ship?
Yeah. Ooh, so I haven't read this article after our conversation. I think I am going to go Google and read this article, first of all. Secondly, I'll preface and say, I believe very strongly in hybrid and remote work. And I know that perhaps some of the listeners have different perspectives and views on that. All good. I think there's space for all different viewpoints. But I will answer going into this being very open that I believe in remote and hybrid types of arrangements. With that, I would say awareness is key. So we are human beings who naturally have unconscious biases. We can have biases toward what we see. There's a natural inclination to say, okay, I see this person being what I perceive as productive, so therefore they must be productive. I don't see this individual. They're not top of mind for me, so perhaps I'm unsure as to their level of productivity. And I think the way that we address that is by awareness, by being hypervigilant and conscious about these biases that exist, but then also finding ways to measure productivity and results that don't include just face time.
Right.
And then I would couple that and say that, yes, I do think people who are fully remote, who work in workplaces that are hybrid or, have in-office presences, I do think there is a bit of a disadvantage and a challenge there. It's not that it's insurmountable, but it exists. So let's be very honest with each other that it exists, and then kind of, come up with plans to address. One of the ways that I think we can address that disadvantage for remote workers is to try to bring them to in-person gatherings at some regular cadence, right? Whether that's every month, every quarter, every 6 months, minimum every year, because we are social creatures. Human beings are meant to have interactions in person with other human beings. And so, yeah, we can work remotely, we can do Zoom, we can do email, we can do all of that. But I think it's critical that we bring people together every so often so that we can bond as human beings and ideate and brainstorm and frankly have fun together. There's a lot of, community building when we're just able to laugh and kick back and be ourselves.
Well, even when most businesses were in person, you do team building events because you needed that time to do more than just work.
Yeah.
Enjoy each other and build the relationship, because that means the work is going to get better. Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes that I think embodies this well is in the newest Top Gun movie with Tom Cruise, right? There's this scene where he's on the beach and his, the team of pilots, they're all playing and cracking up and having fun. And, one of the folks from the service sees that and kind of has a scowl and everything. And I think one of the take home messages there is we can't just be all work all the time. The value and importance of play and of just connecting is so critical to being productive as we work together.
That's a great analogy. I want to go back to a term that you kind of used, and I know you're big on a value-oriented workplace, which you kind of tied to the Gen Z and whatnot. Can you share a little bit more about how you define value-oriented workplace, and this is really unique. So I want to hear more about it.
Yeah, well, I think of values orientation as being clear about who are we, what are we doing, why do we exist, what's our greater purpose in the world, and then having that clarity. And to be very frank, I don't think that there's an absolute right or wrong. I think it's imperative that leaders and organizations define this clearly for themselves and then communicate this broadly to the workplace, and then to listen to employees to understand how can we live out these values even more, because values are something that are around and alive, whether you're intentional or not. Right. And so it is in everyone's best interest for us to be very clear around what is the overall need in the world that we are fulfilling by our existence, right, and how do we play out our values in the organization. And that becomes the very fabric of culture. And that's how organizations can be intentional about culture and hold themselves accountable, because perfection is not the goal. There will be times where, perhaps there's a little bit of a meandering with the implementation of some of these values. And that's okay. I think it's about having a very honest conversation and saying, okay, let's track back toward values. I'll give you an example of where I think sometimes when perceived success and values have conflict, that's when we're really tested as leaders. And I've worked in environments where we may have an individual who is a fabulous sales representative, or they hold key relationships. And sometimes I think there's an inclination to perhaps be overly forgiving of behaviors because they're perceived as being so critical to this relationship or this account, or exceeding their quotas or whatnot. I understand those things, but I think this is where being very upfront about the behaviors that are okay, as well as the behaviors that are not okay, is important. And then ultimately holding that person accountable for being part of living out the organization's values. And if they continue to have behaviors that are incongruous with that, I think making a hard decision to perhaps move them out of the organization, because everyone else in the company is watching our actions. And it's critical that we're not just doing lip service, but that we're really, truly a value-oriented workplace.
So would that translate into like an annual review? If you even do annual reviews where you're not only measuring the accomplishments and results for the year, but you're also measuring how did their performance to the values of the company.
Mm-hmm. So succinctly said, yes. But let me elaborate on that a little bit, because performance reviews are such an interesting topic in the HR space. And going back to some of the generational differences, I think in prior generations, the norm was to have an annual review where a manager and direct report would sit down, and there'd be a litany of achievements and development areas and all of that. And there'd be a pretty overwhelming conversation, between manager and direct report. I think the way that we have evolved, and the way that our organizations function best, is when feedback is not delivered via a U-Haul trailer, right? Like, it's much more effective when we have these nugget-sized, bite-sized pieces of feedback that are continuous in nature. And yes, if organizations want to do performance reviews annually to just sort of document that, no issues with that. But I think the most effective way of delivering this type of feedback, going back to this example, is to have regular, really open, kind, but clear conversations about expectations and results. And then again, like, nothing wrong, I think, with performance reviews, but I wouldn't wait and hold information until there's a performance review.
Oh, yeah. And, micro learning is what most YouTube is. I mean, even these podcasts are micro learnings. And so I think, that micro feedback at, really regular intervals help the employee. Well, I remember, when I was first in the work world, you'd go into that performance review and you had no idea what you were doing. So that you had this anxiety, like, oh, what did I do?
Totally. Well, and when I first started my career, that's how it was, right? Like, I went into these conversations, sweaty palms, I wasn't wearing a heart rate monitor, but I'm sure my heart rate was probably like through the roof. And if you think about it, performance conversations, performance reviews, in my opinion, there should never be information shared that's a surprise. Right. If managers and leaders are doing their job well and effectively, they're giving continuous, bite-sized pieces of information and feedback throughout the year. And so the performance review is just sort of like an amalgamation of all of those other kind of micro conversations in one, just to sort of have an overall review. And that makes it a lot more approachable, so that it's not an anxiety-provoking process.
Right. Yeah. So I think if leaders just recognize that, hey, it doesn't have to be an hour long. It can be a 5-minute conversation throughout the year, lots of them. Mm-hmm. Your employees are gonna feel much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's ultimately a lot more effective as well.
Great. Well, you've had a great journey. We probably could talk hours on HR kind of stuff, but I want to start digging into your specific leadership puzzle,
okay,
if we can.
Yeah.
What do you think the most important leadership characteristics that have allowed you to be successful in the workplace?
There are so many thoughts that come to me as you ask that question. I'm going to go back to a quote I read recently. And it's something like, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want to help the room get smarter.
Mm.
And I think that captures a lot of my philosophy around leadership, because I think leadership is about taking care of those who are in our charge. It's about listening. It's about enabling others to do their best work. And in so doing that, we help our organizations be successful. We drive results by focusing on people, by investing in people, by understanding what their goals, dreams, motivations are, and then saying, okay, let's craft a plan that helps you advance and go further in those aspirations. And in so doing, we're able to also deliver on KPIs and OKRs and, all of the business metrics.
If you were to distill that into kind of a unique, what's unique about you, how would you encapsulate that?
I'll try, Jeff. I'll try. There are terms like servant leadership that come to mind, and that really resonates because, these are two words that are often, the word servant and the word leadership are often, they feel like they can be in conflict. Right. That resonates a lot. I think that is what I aspire to be, right? Like in service to those who are on my team, those who are at my company, and those we serve out in the workplace.
I think that was what was going through my mind as you were talking, and so I'm glad that you use that terminology, because I can certainly sense that. Every leader that I've talked to has shared an aha moment that shaped their leadership. So is there a specific point in time or event or activity that you went, oh, wow, okay, I get it now?
Yeah, I'd say for me, my experience has been one that has been built over time. So I can't say that there was a singular aha moment where in my journey it was like, oh my gosh, like this is my aha. This is the moment that it all clicked. This is the moment that I understood leadership, et cetera. I'd say for myself, it's been a journey that's not always been linear, I might add. And I think that often learning and journeys are not truly linear. We think about, like here's point A and here's point B and here's point C, and the slope should be this way for that line and curve, when actually growth and evolution is a lot more circuitous, and it goes up and down and backwards and forwards. And we hope that the arc and the trend over time is one of progress. And I've been very fortunate to have incredible mentors and guides along my journey. And what I've tried to do is take pieces and pearls of wisdom and learning from those different leaders and make them my own. And so if I think back early in my career, one of my managers mentioned, he sat me down and he said, Gianna, your approach and style has a lot of promise and potential, but one of the things that I think you could do better is don't just give people, or tell people what they should do. Give people options. People always like options, even if they're not the greatest options in the world. Give people choice so that they can decide. And then your role as a leader is to help, steward them in the ways that are going to be beneficial to them and to the organization. And I think a very early 22-year-old version of me didn't understand that, because the world was very blunt and clear. And I was like, okay, well, like, here's what it is. And so, that's an example of one of those pieces of knowledge and wisdom that I've, put in my toolkit. And, through my own experiences, I've kind of added some of my own tools and stuff over time. But yeah, for me, it's been more of a learning journey and not so much, a moment in time.
Sure. Do you think that stepping into more formalized HR kind of leadership roles evolved your leadership thinking?
I think so. I think in HR, there's a certain openness to learning and to trying some of these new things, and to being great listeners and coaches, and because it's part of our field also. Yeah. So I do think that choosing this space as my career has enabled me to learn in different ways, because I contrast that with, I could have been an operations leader, or, gone into a very, very different field. And not to say that I don't think I would have learned and grown. I do think that I would have, but I think it would have been very, very different. That arc, I think, would have been a very different one.
Sure. Well, that enables you, because you have a much bigger perspective of leadership, that enables you to have a positive influence on your CEO and the other executives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's one of the beautiful things about HR is we touch all of the, parts of the organization, whether it's, finance or marketing or sales or whatever.
Yeah. I always think if a company has a really strong CEO, from an operations and vision perspective, you got a strong CFO from a financial and a strong CHRO, then you got a three-legged stool that really is a firm foundation for the company to stand on.
100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. Yeah, and it's fine. I think of that as kind of that three-legged stool. I actually use that analogy a lot.
Great minds, I guess. So I want to move into our lightning round. Okay. And I'm just going to throw out a question, and first thing that comes to your mind, just shout it out. So here we go. So what is your favorite hobby?
Travel.
All right. Where's your favorite place to travel to?
Whew. Okay. I'm not going to overthink it. I loved Namibia.
Okay. I have not been there. All right. If you had one superpower, remember, I'm a fan of superheroes. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
To have any superpower I want whenever I wanted it.
Whenever you want it. Okay. So, oh, great.
That's my way of cheating. I will say, Jeff, because I can't decide between time travel, teleportation, reading other people's minds, and flying. All of those sound really amazing and fun to me. And so I want to be able to pick and choose those at will whenever I want.
Love it. All right. So if you could time travel back, what was the best meal you've ever had in your life?
Ooh. Well, I've been very fortunate to have many great meals. One of the most amazing meals I've had was on the roof of a small boutique hotel in Udaipur, India. And it was just an incredible meal. I think I ate until I was essentially comatose, which I don't recommend, but it was a glorious experience and just so delicious. Indian food is one of my favorite foods, and that was just fabulous.
Oh, I love it. Love it. All right. So what unique attribute or puzzle piece do you think you bring to your team?
I'm gonna squeak two in here, even though I'm supposed to just choose one. I think being approachable, but then also listening to people. I think those are, that's like rapid fire, top of mind.
Perfect. All right. Now, what do you think your employees would say your unique puzzle piece is?
Well, you should ask them. I think they'd probably say, and I don't know, and again, I do think they'd have some interesting commentary here, but they'd probably say, Gianna helps us push and achieve beyond what we thought possible.
Love it. All right. Well, I have just a couple of last questions before we finish up our time today. I love giving our guests the opportunity to highlight volunteer activity, nonprofit that they're involved in, some cause that they're really passionate about. Could you share a little bit about yours?
Yeah, so I love this question. Thank you for asking that. So I'm on the board of a really special organization called Project Pearls, and their website is projectpearls.org. And as a Filipino American, it's my way of being involved in the Philippines. So Project Pearls aims to reduce poverty, hunger, and through education programs, empowerment programs, hunger relief programs, medical aid programs, we're able to impact change in some really underprivileged communities. And in fact, a few months ago, I had the privilege of spending a week on the ground in the Philippines, on the outskirts of Manila, doing some really heartbreaking but heartwarming work in these communities. So Project Pearls is very near and dear to me, and I hope that some of the listeners will check them out. Again, they're doing a lot of just really incredible work.
So how, if someone was interested in getting involved, how might they do that? I mean, what kind of activities could someone in the U.S. Get involved with?
Yeah, well, so there's obviously like fundraising work and things like that. There's always a need for people who have various skills, whether that's in graphic design, whether that's in copywriting, whether that's in marketing. Like there are so many needs in a growing nonprofit that we don't have time and resources to always do. So if people are interested, I would say reach out to projectpearls.org. There are folks there to contact through the website, and people are also welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to then put them in touch with the right folks at Project Pearls.
Do you ever do like mission trips or trips with donors to the Philippines?
Yes. So we work in multiple communities throughout the Philippines, but if people are interested in joining for one of those trips, I will be going later this year, actually. So if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. But we do take groups of people into the community who are interested in volunteering and spending time. And again, I go back to this type of a nonprofit that does so much in these communities does need a lot of help and support. So whether it is, hunger relief, whether it's, supply chain operations type of, things, whether it's in the healthcare medical field, there are many different ways to help. And if people are interested in an on the ground experience, that's very, very impactful, and would love to have others join.
Fantastic. And to all of my friends and former colleagues in the Philippines, I'm sure they would love to have on the ground support there too. So
yes,
check out www.projectpearls.org.
Yeah.
All right. One last question, Gianna. What advice would you give to our listeners if they're thinking about implementing a leadership strategy of their own to help grow their capabilities? What would you say that is?
I would say to be courageous and try it. And then don't be afraid to iterate it. I think sometimes the idea when we're starting something that it has to be perfect can almost be paralyzing, because it's like, okay, well, I got to perfect it. I got to think about, okay, what's the strategy here? Is there a follow-up? Is there a program? Is there this? Is there that? And I think sometimes then we wait too long because we're waiting for perfection. Perfection is an aspiration. And so I would encourage folks to listen to people in your organization, understand the need, and then try something. Try something and then iterate it, modify it, add to it, pivot it. Don't be afraid to start in a direction and say, okay, not all of this worked for us. Maybe we want to kind of shift a little bit and focus on these different things. And it's important to have action and to start somewhere. So again, whether you're in a 5-person organization, a 500 or a 5,000-person organization, don't be afraid to get started and then to listen to the feedback of your employees.
Oh, that's great wisdom, Gianna. I've so enjoyed our conversation together. You really come across as that servant leader, and boy, if I was younger, I'd love to work in your team. So thank you for joining us on the Leadership Puzzle.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was great. I enjoyed it.
Oh, what a great episode with Gianna Driver. I had so much fun talking with her. She really does a great job sharing what it means to be a values-driven leader, as well as leading across multi-generations. It would help us greatly if you liked, subscribed, shared, and made some comments below. Tell us what you think. You can also follow us on all of the social platforms at The Leadership Puzzle. Next time, I'm really excited to be sitting down with Emily Hunter. She is the department chair at Baylor University for the management department. It is a fantastic episode that you will not want to miss.